Jack stepped through the narrow pass at dawn, with bronze greaves dusted in red earth and the distant echo of marching feet rolling like thunder across the Peloponnesian hills, while the air smelled of olive trees and cold iron, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a Spartan flute kept a steady rhythm that made his heartbeat fall into line with war itself, even though he was no citizen soldier, only a courier carrying a sealed message that felt heavier than any shield he had ever lifted. And as the sun climbed, the marble temples behind him turned gold, while ahead, the land broke into scarred fields where abandoned shields lay half-buried like forgotten moons, and broken spears pointed accusingly at the pale sky. And every step forward tightened the silence, because the birds had fled, and even the wind moved carefully, as if afraid to wake the dead. And Jack knew he had only one day to cross the valley before the two armies collided again, but time in war bent strangely, so that an hour felt like a lifetime, and a lifetime could vanish between two drumbeats. And by mid-morning, he reached a dry riverbed where Athenian scouts had camped the night before, their fire still whispering smoke into the blue, and he crouched to drink from a shallow pool, tasting mud and copper, while imagining the men who had laughed there only hours ago, now forming ranks somewhere beyond sight. And when he rose, a shadow moved across the ridgeline, not fast, not threatening, just a lone Spartan boy no older than 15, carrying a helmet too large for his head. And for a moment they watched each other across the distance, two lives balanced on the edge of history, neither raising a weapon, because the war belonged to older men and heavier decisions. And then the boy turned and disappeared into the heat shimmer, leaving Jack with the uncomfortable knowledge that tomorrow one of them might lie faceless beneath a pile of shields. And by mid-noon, the sun pressed straight down, turning bronze to fire and leather to stone, and the cicadas screamed so loudly that they masked the faraway clash of practice drills until the ground itself began to tremble in slow pulses that traveled through his sandals into his bones. And he climbed a low rise and saw them at last, two lines of hoplites assembling like living walls, shields overlapping, spears angled forward, sunlight exploding along polished rims, while officers walked behind the ranks, correcting posture as calmly as farmers inspecting crops. And the discipline of it stole his breath, because it was not chaos, but order that made war terrifying, the certainty that once the signal came, no man could step aside without breaking the world behind him. And Jack slid down the far side of the hill, choosing a goat path that wound between thorn bushes and shattered statues, relics of older conflicts, where the stone faces had been hacked away, leaving only blank necks staring toward the sea. And there he met an old woman gathering fallen helmets into a basket as if they were olives, her hands steady, her eyes empty of surprise. And she asked him nothing, only moved aside to let him pass, because messengers were ghosts in these lands, seen but not questioned. And when he finally reached the olive grove that marked the halfway point of his journey, the light had softened into afternoon gold, and for a brief hour, the world pretended to be peaceful, with doves returning to the branches and distant shepherd bells ringing across the slopes. Yet even there, the ground bore the memory of marching feet pressed deep into the soil. And Jack sat with his back against a twisted trunk, opening the seal just enough to glimpse the wax imprint of an Athenian general, realizing that the message he carried would decide whether reinforcements arrived before nightfall, and the weight of unseen death settled across his shoulders, heavier than armor. And as the sun dipped, the wind shifted, bringing with it the unmistakable smell of blood and trampled grass, and the first cries of battle rolled across the valley, not sharp, but low, like the growl of some enormous animal. And he forced himself onward, moving through gathering dusk, while torches began to bloom along the distant lines, fire answering fire across the darkening plain. And by the time the stars appeared, he reached the ruined watchtower that marked the edge of the Athenian camp, where exhausted soldiers leaned on spears and looked at him with hollow eyes, too tired for curiosity. And he delivered the message to a captain whose hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the effort of holding the line for too many days. And when the seal broke, the man closed his eyes in brief relief, because the reinforcements would come at dawn. and somewhere in the night a horn sounded, long and mournful, as if the land itself were exhaling. And Jack stepped outside the torchlight, watching sparks rise into the black sky, thinking of the Spartan boy on the ridge, and the old woman with her basket of helmets, and the endless rows of men who would meet again when the sun returned. And for the first time he understood that history was not written by heroes alone, but by couriers who crossed silent valleys, carrying decisions that turned into battles. And by the time the eastern horizon began to pale, he had been awake for 24 hours, and the armies were already forming once more, bronze against bronze, shadow against light, and he walked away from the camp without looking back, the rhythm of the distant flute fading behind him, as another day of the Peloponnesian War began to carve its mark into the world.